Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to Women Who Rock Investigate, an affiliate of Women Who Rock with Success. We report case studies in the areas of policy and government, medical malpractices, health pandemics, biotech and fracking, global climate change, prison, and police reform, and more. Our topics are covered around the latest breaking news reports in the U.S. and around the globe. We can be heard on Spotify, Google Play, Google Podcast, TuneIn, iTunes, Podbean, Airtime Pro, and SAM Broadcasting radio stations, and more. Our handpicked experts on the show provide credible information from their fields of experience. Join us on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time as we discover the latest in news reports. Now join us live in the studio with our show host, Mrs. Diane Winbush.
Hey, good morning and welcome to Women Who Rock Investigates. Thank you so much for joining us with our latest brand at the 10 o'clock a.m. hour. So today we're going to be talking about politics and we're going to be talking about electoral votes. We're going to be talking about political heights. We're going to talk about how you can define these things, because a lot of times media is one of the most platforms that can cause Americans and citizens to be able to misread certain things when it comes to elections, voters, and then now we got this voter suppression that is going on in a few states as well. So to be able to help us to understand this just a little bit more effectively, we welcome to the platform this morning Miss Anna Mancuso. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning, Diane. Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. So first of all, tell us a little bit about you as to what compelled you to be able to get into this, first with a little introduction about you, and then what led you up to be able to want to get in the political arena as to sharing with individuals about the political hype and some of the things that we need to be watchful of and what we can be able to learn from that as well.
Sure thing. So I actually got into politics. Gosh, I've been in the political arena for over a decade. I got my start working at a major news network, and then from there I went to work in political campaigns. And in 2012, after the campaign ended that I was working on, I went on and started Political Hype, which is a political blog where we basically talk about politics, focusing on Florida and national politics and various policies that are happening around the country and how they affect individuals and how people can really understand, because oftentimes you see information coming out of Washington and it is just so hard to really wrap your mind around, and the bills are really long, and so we really work hard to give information to people where they can take it back and really form their own opinion.
Okay, great. Because as we know, with the mail-in, which was kind of more of a disaster when former President Trump was running for president, it was a total kerfuffle at that time. So explain to the audience and the listeners as to the process that and it's probably a tedious process as to what the individuals who are collecting the mail-in votes, the process that they have to go through. Because a lot of times we think that, they're doing something to the votes or they're throwing them in the trash and what have you, but that's a lot of counts that those individuals have to go through.
Yes, it is. And I think it's very clear I think it's really important to really kind of put a fine point on when we talk about vote by mail initiatives. Vote by mail has been around forever, right? And obviously it seemed like it was really under the microscope in 2020 because we were, experiencing a global pandemic, and we had, a president who was running for re-election who was really driving home that there was going to be fraud and all these problems. But the reality is the Heritage Foundation, it's a conservative think tank, they compiled a list of voter fraud cases in the U.S. beginning in 1948, and every federal election held since that point in time, which is billions of votes cast, they actually found 1,277 cases of voter fraud. right? So we're looking at such a minuscule number, right? And I think it's also important when we talk about what the process is for voting by mail. When you mail in your ballot and you drop it into a ballot box or you send it through the postal service, in some states they have the ability, in Florida, for example, they have the ability to actually begin counting as they're getting the votes. However, in other states, during the 2020 cycle, Republican-led legislatures, and I want to be clear on that because oftentimes people are like, well, why were they waiting until after Election Day? Because they were passing legislation saying that they were not allowed to count until after Election Day. And they went through, and that's why we saw a disparity between voter totals after the election night when everybody probably went to bed and woke up and we started seeing various gaps being closed. But yes, the people working in the elections and counting the votes literally counted. And Georgia went through a recount 3 different times. They did a hand recount 3 different times for the 2020 presidential election, and that was the only portion of the ballot in which they did the recount. And that's important to understand because Georgia does perform audits, and the reason they chose the presidential race as an audit was to show just how secure and the integrity they had with their votes that were happening in the Peach State.
Okay, great. Fair enough. So we're going to back up a little bit. We want you to be able to share. We're going to talk about political hype, but we'll get back to the voters' suppression in a little bit and what have you. So we want to get back to the political hype, okay? So what are some of the takeaways that you would want Americans or perhaps maybe individuals around the globe to be able to understand more about your strategy and drive? And I know one of them was, you want individuals to understand it a little bit more, but how can political hype even be more impactful so people can be able to get the accurate of what's going on? Because a lot of times now, I'm a Fox News fan. I watch Fox News, and CNN is another station that I like to watch. That way you can be able to get a more general understanding of the people that are on the panel, what they do and their purpose, and then you could be able to understand what's going on a little bit better. And so what are some more major impacts that you would like, or some takeaways, that you would want Americans to be able to understand about political hype?
Diane, I am so glad that you asked. And one of the things about political hype, from even on its inception, I mean, look, we just celebrated our 8th year, which is incredible. The main goal of political hype was to make – thank you so much. I know, it's a party, man. I'm so excited about that. And, it's so crazy because when you start something, you don't imagine that it's going to grow to where it has. And I will say that the overall goal of political hype, from the very first blog post to every single, week when I put out a new one, is to allow people to make their own decision and to shoot straight down the middle. Like, I've often told people that when it comes to political analysis, I'm a ref and I call it like I see it. But I'm not going to, my job for the readers of Political Hype and the people that find themselves at politicalhype.com is not to make up the minds for them. It's to show them the facts and for them to walk away and say, okay, well, this is what I think, or this is, maybe I don't agree with that, or maybe I hadn't looked at it from this perspective. And that's really the goal. And when I think about who my audience is, of course, everybody in the country and beyond. However, that being said, I really hope to garner a large swath of female readers because I think oftentimes when it comes to politics, well, there are a lot of female elected officials. We saw the glass ceiling be broken with Vice President Kamala Harris being elected as president. In Florida, we have, women elected to the state legislature, et cetera. But I think that overall, women get lost in the shuffle when being spoken to on these news networks. And so we want to be able to have these conversations with other women and show them that, look, like, politics is important and we know that you're worried about other things, but this is how it's going to impact you in the long term.
Absolutely, because, a lot of times, as I stated on different news broadcasting platforms, you see more men speaking out, giving their expertise and their legal advice as to what's going on and what have you. But you see rarely women that and I like the Don Lemon show and what have you on CNN at night, and so he has a few women, but I feel that there are less women that are being able to provide information as an analyst, as a legal analyst in politics, as what have you. So take for instance, we're gonna discuss, and this is not anything to be judgmental, and so of course we just had the issue where the 13 soldiers were killed and what have you, and so President Biden, and I like what you stated, and I just finished telling someone you have to have facts and evidence, and so I like that how you brought that out in the last statement that you had made. But even with and people were livid, so was I. I'm serious as to how the structure went down with the Afghanistan and how we let our guards down, where we're trusting individuals that are not. That is not trustable. And so even with, I think a couple of days ago, he had addressed the nation where he's looking for anybody that's willing to make peace. Well, there is a lot of individuals in this country that don't want peace, does not want peace with Americans, with the United States and what have you. And so even with that being said, how do you feel, even with that could have played out in a different way, as to making sure, I'm not going to say it would have stopped the Americans from being assassinated, but in your terms, how do you feel that could have been played out in a better, effective way so individuals could have been safe and safeguarded, coming from Afghanistan here to the United States? What is your take on that?
Well, Diane, I'm glad you asked, and I think that one of the things that I have been very vocal about in Afghanistan is the fact that America leaving Afghanistan, us withdrawing all of our troops and bagging it in and going home, did two things. One, it gave the Taliban the PR campaign of, look at us, we just defeated the largest superpower in the world, and that's a recruitment poster waiting to happen. Two, it also does not mark the end of the war in Afghanistan. It marks the end of America's involvement, which unfortunately for the people of Afghanistan and the soldiers that we lost as we were leaving is horrible. And I think that when we think about Afghanistan as a whole, we have to recognize that a complete drawdown with troops and bringing everybody home, and look, I'm somebody who believes that yes, like our troops, they should come home. However, we need to withdraw everyone from a region in which we were unable to create a stable nation state, where military advisors and intelligence analysts were warning President Biden that if we did this, that the Taliban government would not be able to self-sustain for longer than 6 months. It didn't even make it 6 months. And I think that was a lot of damage done to America's standing on the world stage as a superpower. It causes a lot of problem for the Afghan people and the 13 American lives that were lost as we were trying to leave. And now it's a boondoggle of sorts, and they're going to descend into a civil war, and eventually America will most likely be recalled back into Afghanistan.
That makes sense, simply because of the fact that there is a lot of business that is unfinished. I even heard on CNN one of the legal analysts had shared as to how many billions of weapons that we even left over there in Afghanistan, which, could have been a big supply for the United States, and also it's going to give the Talibans, or however you want to pronounce it, an upper hand as to the new technology that they don't even have, but it's going to be new technology that they can be able to gain and access. One political analyst was stating that, I think it was on Fox News, that they were thinking that the Taliban are going to, perhaps profit profit off of some of the, tons of millions of dollars of the weapons that were left over there in Afghanistan. And I felt that was a very, very poor strategy as to how it was handled, not being judgmental towards the president and what have you, but I don't think that the process was thought through all the way as far as to, it's been 20 years. We understand that, and the people need to come home. That's understandable too. But at the same time, you have to think out a process before you, go in and make a move, that quick, and then you don't have a resolution, afterwards, and so they're really crushing him in the media in regards to that.
Yeah, no, he absolutely is being taken to task. But here's the thing. We knew Joe Biden heading into the White House, he was not going to be the foreign policy president. He just wasn't. He was domestically focused, and the only way he was going to be involved in foreign policy in any matter is if he was pulled into it and if he was trying to solidify a legacy, which he wanted to be the president that campaigned on ending forever wars. And he has done that. However, he's started kind of a bigger issue now, and it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. It's going to take him some time to get out from underneath of this crisis. And we did see when he was addressing the UN General Assembly this past week, it's his moment to really figure out how he moves forward, but it's going to have to be very strategic. And this is not an overnight fix. This was horrible. The intel that keeps coming out, it just gets worse. I mean, we just found out this past week that the drone strike killed innocent children. I mean, I'm not sure this could get any more worse, Diane, to be honest with you. So he's going to have to really think strategically and long and hard on how he moves forward in the foreign policy space when it comes to doing other things abroad.
Absolutely, I agree. So we want to shift to another crisis that we're going through. And so how do you help with the political hype campaign that you have, strategy that you have, organization that you have? How do you help individuals to be able to understand the crisis that we are going through with the border? It is totally unethical. It's totally ridiculous as to a lot of catastrophic things that have happened with the Haitians. We understand that. The United States have always been a compassionate country for others, helping them, with food, clothes, and shelter and what have you. I think it's going to be a huge economic impact that's going to come on the United States. And I know I may be jumping all over the place because I'm trying to get a lot of things in with you to be able to share with the listeners with that. And then we're going to go to the other side where we talk about the other immigrants as well as the Hispanics and the border. Because I'm gonna put a pin in that one. But we want to talk about first about the border and how the individuals are being treated. A lot of individuals, political analysts are saying it's kind of wrong. They're on horses, and I think they got whips, beating the Haitians back across the border and what have you. But I feel that if, Mary Anna, if we let all of those tens of thousands of people to come into the United States, it's going to make a huge impact on our economy here in the U.S.
Yes, that's correct. I think that when it comes to the immigration crisis, I think that it has definitely been magnified. And we do know that we had an immigration crisis under the former administration, and we had, everything from, shock and awe headlines of kids in cages to kids being separated from their family, and now we see a massive wave of people trying to come into this country. And I think that when we think about immigration and in the entire immigration crisis, there needs to be an overhaul in our immigration system, and we have to think about how we're going to do this. And again, we have to be strategic. If you're sensing a theme when it comes to my analysis and advice to the Biden administration, it's let's be strategic. Like if they were going to have a rally cry or like a campaign slogan in the White House when he walks into the Oval every day, it's let's be strategic, and we have to really think about this. And we know that, in 2018, there was, CNN clips and Fox News clips of this migrant caravan that was coming to America. And now we see it again. And at some point, we have to figure out how we're going to handle that, but we have to figure out how we're going to do this focusing on human rights, right? Regardless if you're American, if you are Haitian, if you are coming from Mexico, if you are coming from Syria, if you're coming from Afghanistan, etc., your human rights matter. It doesn't matter American lives aren't worth more than somebody else's life. And I think that is something that we have to be cautious of, but we have to really think about the immigration system and really think about envisioning an overhaul for that. But we do know that Congress is busy with other things right now, and I think it'll be interesting to see as we look to the 22 cycle, the midterm elections, which are coming up, and we will see Republicans hammering home on immigration. They're going to hammer home on inflation. They're going to talk about, the debacle in Afghanistan. They're going to do things that are going to rile up the base and get them to turn out. And so I think that with that being said, the Democrats have to play a little bit of defense, and they're going to have to get out there and do what they can, because otherwise we're looking at a red wave in the House in 22.
Even with it started from the border crisis started. I'm not for sure, but I do want to say that former President Trump did try to fix it by, and I think they were kind of, going back and forth with him, Congress, about, releasing the funds in order for him to be able to build the wall and to, bring the wall up so it can be able to prevent a lot of things. I know that was one of his pet peeves when he was in office, to be able to fix that crisis and what have you. And some of the things that he attempted to do in that area in regards to immigration policy, it was kind of played down. It was kind of, mashed down or kind of overlooked, because sometimes we don't see things as they are, just like Al Gore, former Vice President Al Gore, was still talking last night on the news about the global warming. He went in there, he warned them years ago about it, and so the people just, shunned it off and what have you. And so I just think that sometimes we have to have, as you stated, we have to have a better strategy. We have to be willing to listen and what have you, as to making sure that we're paying attention to facts, evidence, especially if we're seeing it and they're becoming a crisis. I think the United States is in a lot of heat right now in regards to immigration policy, as well as this pandemic, which we're going to talk about next, in regards to the children. And also, I would like to say that it's in a major issue with the voters and what have you. We'll get back to that in a second, too. So we're going to talk about the children and the crisis that we are headed for that with the pandemic. So when I was coming up and raised in the 60s, Mary Anna, before we went to school, public school systems, it was a mandatory thing for all children to be vaccinated with the measles and the mumps and what have you. And I'm trying to figure out as to, and I'm pretty sure others are as well, as to why is it such a huge issue now, as to why parents, and I know religion may have something to do with it, or, you're taking our rights away from us, but I don't think so. If we were mandated, and children are still mandated today, before they are able to enter the primary school system or the public school system, you have to have these vaccination shots. So that's my thing as to why people are protesting, why people you feel that are protesting. They're coming out, especially in Florida. Florida is a huge state that is, fighting against it for their children to be vaccinated, with this pandemic.
Yes, no, it's Florida. Florida is one of those states that just kind of tries to outdo every other state at everything, and this is not something we really Florida wants to win at, but can't tell Ron DeSantis nothing, so that's fine. But let's talk about the children, and let's talk about this global health crisis that, Diane, if someone would have told me 5 years ago that I needed to prepare for a pandemic, I would have laughed. And then if they would have said, oh, and by the way, the pandemic is going to rage on for a year and a half, I would have been like, that's cute, right? It's crazy to think that. So when we think about just the pandemic and people talking about, we hear often, my civil liberties, and you can't mandate vaccines for my children, and you can't mandate vaccines for myself. My response to that conversation, I've been having numerous conversations with friends, family members, colleagues, just having conversations to find the reticence. And really what this comes down to is that, there's a lot of unknowns, and I get that. However, if we look back into history, which I think is important to understand the future, is to look back at history. And there was an English philosopher, his name was John Stuart Mill, and in 1859 he released an essay called On Liberty. And in On Liberty, he talks about the harm principle. Now, John Stuart Mill was somebody who was all about civil liberties. He believed that you have a right to do whatever it is that you want to do. However, his harm principle stated that ends where somebody else's civil liberties begin. Therefore, if I swing my fist, my ability to swing my fist ends where your nose starts. And when it comes to the pandemic and being vaccinated, specifically in regards to our children, we've vaccinated them, as you mentioned. I mean, I was vaccinated too as a kid, measles, mumps, rubella, you name it, they were sticking me with it as a child so that I could go to school and hang out with my peers. It's no different than that. And we have to think, if you're a kid and you are going to be a functioning member of society and participate in society, it's not just about you and your health. It's about your neighbor's health. It's about your community's health. And I think that as a result of us all being forced indoors for so long and focused on our digital connections, we're no longer connecting with people in the real world, and it makes it harder to empathize with other individuals. And when we lose that ability to empathize, it makes it harder to understand why we should do something, not just for ourselves, but for the good of our community. And I really think that that's a message that isn't being spoken about enough, because everybody gets their back up against the wall and gets very defensive and is like, well, I'm not going to do that because my child. Okay, well, did you vaccinate your child for measles? Yes. Mumps? Yes. Rubella? Yes. Well, what about polio? Yeah, of course. I don't want my kid to have polio. Okay, well, fantastic. You want them to potentially get a disease that we don't even know of what the long-term ramifications are after they've actually gotten better from it. And so I understand that, and I don't have children, I can't speak to that. However, what I can speak to is that I too found myself, when vaccines were first released, having that reticence of I don't know if I'm okay with this. I don't want to put something I don't know is going to have these effects in my body. Is this okay? I had all of these questions. And, I spoke with, medical people, my doctor. I spoke with people that I'm friends with that work in health and science. I had these tough conversations and thought about it and prayed about it and realized that it wasn't just about me that I was going to be protecting, but it was about protecting my family, my friends, and my community. And I think when we think about how we're able to help others and do the patriotic thing, that's a different lens to look at this through. And I don't think a lot of people are really thinking about it in that context.
Absolutely, because a lot of the cases with the pandemic, as I stated, and we're not for sure as far as the accuracy on the numbers, because Florida is a state where we're trying to transition to as we speak. And I'm like, wait, is this the right time to be able to go there and move and regroup and what have you? But, and sometimes I think that some of the numbers may be inflated, if you will, and what have you. And I know that people, as you stated, they've been cooped up, and then, hey, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to enjoy my life, my freedom, and people run to the beaches and what have you. But I just, I try to defend for the state of Florida, because I just, feel that I think we're just putting a lot of emphasis on some areas, and the school teachers are not doing this. We got more cases rising in the state of Florida, or we're running out of beds and what have you. I'm like, no, let's just lay this down for a minute. Don't put all the heat on Florida. On the Florida. There's a lot of other states out there that are now rising to the top. Right, because
you have to think about the people that are going to Florida, as you mentioned. Right, people are beginning to travel. So people that don't live in Florida now are visiting Florida, and then they're going to their home state. And so it's just this whole cyclical situation. And, it's the whole thing that I've been saying during this. Yeah, exactly. It's just all this political hype. And the thing is the one thing I've always talked about since the beginning of this pandemic, because people are like, I don't get it. Why don't people understand? We have to do X, Y, and Z. Because what you're doing is you're asking people to change their behavior. And we know, I'm sure you have friends, I've got friends, January, right? December, January, everyone's like, oh, I'm going on a diet, I'm going to drop 15 pounds. You watch me do this. Like, it's a New Year's resolution. And by March, they're not doing it, right? They're still paying for a gym membership that they're not going to. And it's not because their intention is bad. It's because they have to change their behavior. They have to put down the bag of chips and pick up the apple. And that is not, changing behavior is not easy. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes, you know, a cognizant moment to say, okay, this is what needs to be done. And that actually takes a lot more brain power than the muscle memory of grabbing the chips and the fast food, you know. So that's the problem. We're asking people to change their behavior, and that does not happen overnight. As we see, it doesn't even happen in 18 months, Diane. So
they are still fighting against it. I mean, you know, and I guess, sometimes you sympathize with them, if I'm not able to have the certain amenities that I was born with, so it's always been freedom here, especially in the United States. Sometimes, people get cooped up, they get tired and what have you. So some of it you understand, and then some of it, as you stated, if we want to be able to see change, we have to be able to modify our behavior patterns. So we want to, before we get ready to end the show, we want to be able to talk about another topic, Mary Anna, that it's kind of infusing a lot of cultures here in the United States, and that's in regards to voters' suppression. I think they just about tried to martyr the governor of Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was the state when he went in and presented the bill and signed it in regards to trying to get got the bill passed in regards to voters' suppression and what have you. Because at first, they had it where the prisoners could not vote if they were a convicted felon or what have you. And I think it even got down to the part where, okay, if you're standing out here and you're waiting to go to the ballots or what have you, we're not going to offer you cold water or what have you and stuff. And so we want you to be able to share to the audience in regards to that as well, in regards to voter suppression, defining it, what it means, and what we can be able to do to be able to I guess you can't change it if it's already been put into law, but what we can be able to do to be able to learn more about it and be able to adjust, I guess that would be the better word.
Sure thing, yeah. So voter suppression, it seems like a buzzword these days. We hear that almost everywhere recently, which is unfortunate. But it is basically, what it is it's putting a barrier in front of people, in front of the ballot box for people to go and vote. So it's preventing people from exercising their civic duty and their right as an American to vote. And I think that, when we think about voter suppression, I want to be clear before we kind of get into some examples of voter suppression. I want to just share some staggering statistics. I mean, seriously, I about fell out of my chair and it had me clutching my pearls because I could not believe these statistics. So in 2018, Latinx and Black Americans were twice as likely as whites to be unable to get off work while the polls were open to go vote. That's ridiculous. Wow. And I can't even believe that that's a thing. And the reason that is so crazy to me is because now we've seen laws in states that are restricting the hours of early voting, the time in which the polls are open, the access to the ballot boxes. And then we've seen that because of voter disenfranchisement across the country, 1 in 16 Black Americans cannot vote. Wow. For whatever reason, they just are unable to vote. And that is way too many people that cannot exercise their right to vote. And when we talk about our voters, we talk about voters with disabilities. In 2020 alone, 18% of voters who had disabilities had difficulty and reported difficulties in being able to go vote. And, I mean, that is just so awful on so many levels. And what this means when we think about these things, we know that between January 1st of this year and July 14th of 2021, 18 states have enacted 30 laws to make it harder to vote.
Wow.
Georgia, Florida, Arizona. I'm looking at you guys. Texas. Hey, Texas. They're doing some crazy things in Texas. It's like Texas wants to out Florida, and really they shouldn't. But Texas has put in one of the strictest voting ID laws. Georgia is now reducing the time in which you can request your absentee ballot. Florida is placing restrictions on where ballot drop boxes are, and oftentimes in communities of color, there are not enough places for people to drop off their ballots. And it reduces the residents' ability in Florida to vote by mail. So what does all this mean for the average American that's like, hey, I just want to vote for my elected representative? That means that I encourage you to register to vote today. If you haven't, they always say the best time to register to vote was yesterday, but today works too. Make sure that you're registered well in advance of the next election. The next election is next November 22. And also know your voter laws in your state. Every state is different, but having an idea of your state, what that means, so you can look up online whatever county you live in. If you live, let's say, you live in Palm Beach County, Florida, you can log on and Google Palm Beach, Florida, Supervisor of Elections, and it will bring you to the website, and it will outline what the voter laws are that you need to know before you go to vote, or how you get an absentee ballot. And I think it's really, really important because we have a civic duty. We have an ability to make our voices heard. And anybody who doesn't think that they can make their voice heard by one vote, I want to remind them that in 2000, the election between Vice President Al Gore and George W. Bush came down to 533 votes.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine if 534 people showed up and voted a different way? That's all it would have taken.
Wow.
And we would have had a complete different president in office. So your vote does count. I am like forever. My friends make fun of me because usually around the summer before the election of any election year, I'm always calling my friends, calling my family, are you guys registered? Is your registration up to date? Have you requested absentee if you're not going to be in the state to vote? You know, and they're like, what? I'm like, you guys have an ability. And thanks to the Constitution, the 14th and 15th Amendment guarantees everybody the right to vote. And I think that it's really important that we get there. And when I think about disenfranchisement laws, I think about in Florida in 2018, there was Amendment 2, which was to restore the Felon Rights to Vote Act. And it had to pass Florida had to vote for it with a supermajority, which meant over 60%. Unfortunately, it was Amendment 4. Unfortunately, it did pass. It passed with 62% because Florida believed that those that had committed and paid their time in society deserved to come back and vote. However, the Republican legislature recalled the amendment and said, well, we can't pass it. We need to work it up still. And so that's an example of voter disenfranchisement, where our felons who have paid their debt to society are now unable because now they have to have all these fees and they have to be pay all this and do all these things just to get their rights restored. And I think that is such a travesty to the American people. And so when we think about communities which are heavily impacted when it comes to voter suppression, that's just one example of others. But we have to be very cognizant of this. And, one of the things I encourage is to write your representative. Tell them that, don't vote for these types of bills. If they've already voted, tell them that you're going to be voting them out. Because here's the thing. A lot of times, and I deal a lot in electoral reform, and one of the biggest electoral reforms I hear from people is we need to have term limits. These people are sitting in Congress forever. Chuck Schumer, who's the senator from New York, has been sitting in Congress. No joke. He addressed my graduating class from college. I've been out of college for a while. That's how long he's been in the Senate, right? So people want term limits. Well, the easiest way to term limit your elected representative is vote them out.
That's right.
We don't need to pass a bill in Congress because they're not going to pass a bill to vote that literally term limits them on a job, right? We want them to. And some elected representatives do support term limits. Some of them actually will term limit themselves and say, I've been in office for 3 terms, I'm not going to run again. However, the ones that you just drive you crazy and are passing policies that are not good for your family or the rest of your community, you have an ability to make your voice heard by showing up to the ballot box and voting them out. And I think that's really, really important. So if everyone that's been listening only takes away one thing today, may it be that they're checking their voter registration and that they're voting people out that don't serve them and their community in the way that they believe that their voices need to be heard.
Absolutely, because I believe that a fresh pair of eyes and a fresh pair of intuitive is really good, even for politics, and that is, I kind of work a little bit with the prison reform as well, and that's something that I always try to help individuals to understand on these Facebook groups, that you can't complain and you're still going to you're still showing up at the election boxes, still checking the same person's name and what have you. You're still putting the judges back in the bench on the benches that don't need to be there, and you're still putting, certain individuals back into power. And that's the reason why we continue sometimes to see the same results in the United States. It's because, as you stated, people have been there too long, and those people are not going to be able to benefit. They're trying to benefit, their colleagues and their friends. They don't have any, just like, I don't want to really just say anything, but Nancy Pelosi, I said I had two more questions for you, but I think I got about three. Nancy Pelosi, this lady goes in here, if you have the time, then we can do about three more questions. Nancy Pelosi, this lady goes in here and she instigates this, that's the way I see it. She instigates this president up, run for president. I think it was former President Trump was addressing the nation on an afternoon program, and she was in there just, tearing up papers while he was, on live national television in front of the world, and she was sitting behind him and what have you. But now, since we have all of these crises, you cannot find any of these political gurus that was supporting President Biden, and now they have went in, they have they have taken a back seat. You don't see them anywhere. And now President Biden is using his Secretary of State and, of course, his and I can't think of her name, but he's using her. He's using this other gentleman to be able to hide behind things. That's his responsibility, is to take effective leadership and what have you. And, like I stated, people were livid. People are still offended. They're still livid as to how that Afghanistan era, even was carried out. How are you going to pull out the people? How are you going to pull out the troops without pulling out your people first and your equipment and everything that's over there, and then you're going to pull the troops out first? It was just totally putting the cart, or should have been, the cart should have been in the right place, and he put it in the wrong place. So we've already discussed that. What I want to talk about now is media hype. We talked about political hype. Do you feel that the media is responsible? And which, look, that's how we learn. It's like a pro and con. It's like 50-50 to me. I was like, well, wow, we need this media to be able to help us to stay abreast as to what's going on. The journalists do a very, very awesome job after the president, any president, whether it's Reagan, Nixon, or Obama, whatever president, they have a very, very good strategy as to how they hold these leaders in accountability. At the same time, I still feel that it's a media hype there, too, as well, because now you're giving out all this information, and these other individuals in other foreign countries, they're watching it. They're trying to figure, how we can be able to gain access and what have you, and I feel that sometimes it's a huge hype. The hype is so huge in the media, and it causes other individuals to be able to be impacted. So take, for instance, it was both the president was criticized because he was on some kind of, I don't know if it was a horseback riding thing the other day while we had the crisis going on with the border, and they call her Miss Giggles on Fox News, which is Kamala, the Vice President Kamala Harris, and so they just, they were saying that she was at some other type of event where they should have been addressing the Americans and addressing these crises that we're going through. But I think it's kind of like the media kind of hypes it up. But look, after they reported it and showed it, then that's when they come out the next day and trying to make all of these good reports. So, I don't know. It's a pro and a con on both sides to me. Right,
and I think to your point, it's important when I think one of the biggest things that often happens is that the media likes to whip things into a frenzy, right? There's the old adage of newspapers, which is just awful, but it's, if it bleeds, it leads, because it's attention grabbing. It's why we like social media. It's attention grabbing. Right. People love it because it doesn't stop. It doesn't sleep. So how do we weed through that? One is always, as you mentioned, you watch Fox, you watch CNN, watching multiple different channels to get a more well-rounded view, because if you watch just one channel, I don't care if it's CNN, I don't care if it's Fox News, if you just watch one, you'll never hear the other side. And that's because there was a fairness doctrine, I don't remember the year. Basically what it was legislation that was passed that said the media had to show both sides. They couldn't pick a side. And I think we have to have more pragmatic reporting like that. We have to show the facts, and we have to make sure that the facts that we're sharing, one, have evidence to support them, and two, that we're all operating under those facts. And that's been the biggest thing. In social media, anybody can publish anything, and you don't even have to have fact-checking. I can tell you when I was in college, my professors would tell me, well, you can't use Wikipedia as a source because anybody can crowdsource and do anything. Now people use that all the time to support what they're saying, and that's terrifying to me on multiple levels, and we don't have enough time to talk about why that scares me, Diane. However, when we think about the news and we think about the media, we have to make sure that we're all operating under the same set of facts. And when we have that and we recognize that, I think it can tamp down. We can't do this shock and awe. People cannot live in a consistent state of, just hysteria. Eventually you will burn out, and it's not good for our mental health, which is something that I talk a lot about, because I think that mental health is something that has been obviously just further strained during the pandemic, but we have to reduce that stigma. And with people always watching the news and being constantly glued to one crisis to the next, everything is a crisis today. Everything. It doesn't matter. Something is a crisis, right? A light bulb went out. Oh my God, the White House doesn't have a light bulb. It's a crisis. I saw a news article the other day that the cat that they've adopted in the White House can't come yet because Major has some aggression issues, I guess. He's had some issues, but that's a crisis. We cannot as a society lurch from one crisis to the next. We have to pick and choose, but the choosing of what we're choosing has to be based in facts and evidence and reality. Let's really be clear about that.
Absolutely. I most agree with you on that one. So this will be the last question of this interview. And so what are some of the long-term goals that you would like to build with Political Hype? I know that you are you're an organization and what have you, and you are trying to make sure individuals get the knowledge. You're trying to make sure that individuals get the facts and the evidence. But what are some of the things that you would like to do or like to see with Political Hype as a long-term goal?
Oh, gosh, you're asking me to dream big. And you know what? There's nothing more I love than dreaming big, Diane. So, honestly, I would love for Political Hype to eventually open a philanthropy wing and be able to go into middle schools and high schools and colleges and engage students and get them energized about their civic duty when it comes to voting.
Oh, wow. That is awesome. I know that we had she was Miss Tampa, but now she's Miss Florida, Leah Rottenberry. And so that's one of her goals that she's working on now. And that's, trying to help even the youth to be able to learn more about the Constitution, about how things work with, certain elections and what have you. And so I think we had her on the show about 3 months ago and what have you, did a very, very awesome presentation as to how she wants to be able to impact individuals in the state of Florida, and I'm pretty sure around the U.S. as a humanitarian in that area, in that effort. So this is your time where you can be able to share with the listeners about your endeavors. You can be able to share your links, anything that you have published with around the U.S., any books or anything like that, and how the listeners can be able to also follow you after the show. You can be able to do that at this time.
Excellent. Well, if you want to stay up to date on anything happening in Political Hype, you can check us out on politicalhype.com. New blog posts are published on Fridays. You can follow me on Instagram at Mariana_Mancuso. You can follow me on Twitter at Mariana Mancuso. And if you're always really curious about what I got going on and what my daily thoughts are, you can check me out on youtube.com/Mariana Mancuso. And, of course, I wouldn't be a millennial if I wasn't on TikTok at Mariana Mancuso for more fun videos and politically leaning things. But, yeah, that's where you can find me. I encourage everyone to follow me and just to, stay in tune. Feel free to shoot a message if there's anything that is pressing and you want to know more about. I'm always happy to sit down and talk about those things.
Absolutely. Listeners, we have learned a lot today about voter suppression. We have learned a lot about elections. We have learned about mail-in votes and what have you. We have learned a lot about the media hype, and most of all, we have learned a lot about political hype. And the founder is Mariana Mancuso, and how she is trying to even build a better force as to giving you evidence, facts, and how electoral elections and politicians work. So, Mariana, we thank you so much for being our guest on the show on today. We enjoyed this entire session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Diane. I greatly appreciate you and your time and your listeners for taking time to pay attention.
Great. Everyone have a great day, and you know where to go. You can go to learn more about us at www.womenwhorockwithsuccess.com. Thank you again for being our guest.
Thank you.